Okay, Assalamu alaikum. I'm gonna just show you how to trim the brisket, how to then season it, and then how to light the fire on a green egg or any dome smoker and then cook it. So first, this is like the whole brisket, which is called a packard. So this is both has a point, which is the fatty part, and the flat. So I usually wear a glove on the left hand and the knife on the right, and in this way I can keep the things clean. So usually I just cut this first. You can cut it anyway, but just make sure that you are uh, you want to trim the brisket from the fat before, but you want to make sure that the it's colder. If it gets really at the room temperature, then it's difficult to trim the fat. So while it's colder, it will be easier to do it. And I should give credit to Franklin Barbecue. That's how I learned how to make the brisket. But you know, over a few things I learned. But obviously, he's a professional chef, so he does things maybe a little differently. So I'll tell you exactly about everything that works and that doesn't work. I'm trying to make sure that the blood stays in that. Okay, so I got this. And I should tell you that I thank my wife Maria who's making the video kindly and nicely. Okay, so this one doesn't have much of the fat on it on this side, but what you want to do is you want to make sure that you trim the fat. If I can show it to you from this side, you will see it that this has the fat and this is the meat part, and it's turned a little brown, which is fine. Nothing happens to the meat by turning it brown. If you really like, you can just cut a little slice to see how it looks. So this is a prime brisket. So this is a prime meat, and you can see it from the striations in the meat. So if you're making a brisket that you're going to eat, it's best that you do a prime. If you're gonna make just the sandwiches, then you can even choose a choice. So this is a huge layer of fat. When you cook it, not all of this is going to render, so you want to make it like, leave only about quarter an inch, and you want to make sure that it's as even as possible. I start with usually like, this bigger part of the fat and trim that. This fat is usually no use, so you can usually like, just throw it. So when I was cutting it here, I saw like a little meat. So I know that I'm getting like, this probably would be a good depth. So usually you want to make sure that your knife is sharpened. This is a boning knife. So like, when I cut it, I realize it like I'm getting close. So that would be a good depth. Usually like, this fat that is like a little wrinkled up here, you can clean it. But you want to make sure that like, it stays even. This is the fat cap. This is the one that I keep it towards mostly the hotter side of the grill. So it's okay to leave the fat here. The whole goal is to make sure that the fat is evenly trimmed off of it. So when you're cutting your brisket, it has the even amount of fat on it. And usually like, this is a creek stone brisket. When they're sending it, they have basically trimmed it, but usually like, you still need to trim it to make sure that this is good enough. Usually like, if it's a 14-pound brisket, by the time I trim it, it probably will take a couple of pounds off. And this, if I remove more of this fat, when I'll cook it, the brisket will get like, more burnt here. So you want this fat. You don't want to see, oh, I don't like the fat part and I'm not going to do it. You won't be able to do that, So you have to have this fat up on the top. Be careful with this part because, you can, if depending on your knife, you can probably like, cut your hand as well. So there's not much fat up here. So when I'm trimming it here, it's basically getting thin, but this fat here has a lot of a lip itself, so it's basically uneven. So you have to be just like, you know, watch it and then cut it like reasonably well. So if I'm doing it like, you know, for example, if it was really like a competition or something, I'll probably like, you know, or if I'm just entertaining like, you know, friends, and if I have more time, I'll probably try to remove this just for the, you know, aesthetic sense, because I don't like it, but this doesn't do anything, like, you know, just because it looks like this, there's nothing wrong with this versus this. It's just that this is like a Kashmiri, a little fatty person. So I can make fun of Kashmiri people because I'm a Kashmiri. Yes, you cannot, if you're not a Kashmiri, you cannot make fun of Kashmiri. I can, because I'm a Kashmiri. So this is also this part. So there's basically a big muscle. This is basically your pectoralis major and pectoralis minor. So this has a fat that runs in between the two muscles, and which you have to take it off. So this is the part. I'm gonna flip the brisket. So the top fat is a good fat, but this fat, this is a hard fat. This you have to take it off because this will not cook, this will not render. So this one, as much as you can take off, is probably better. So each brisket, depending on like, you know, the animal would have more or less of this part. So this one basically runs in between, because this one won't render when you cook it. If it comes in between, you're not gonna like it. So you want to cut this, and this one usually is running between the two layers of muscles. So this is the flat part is here, this fat runs in between, and then that's the point part. So this one, when I do it, I want to make sure that I don't create too much of a divot, but you can see that, like, you know, you can start realizing that this is the thing, that a fat layer that goes all the way in. So you want to like keep it as smooth, but also kind of like, you know, smoothly take out as much of it. This is a harder fat, much easier to cut, not like the fat that is up on top. And this is a fat that basically would not cut, would not like, you know, render when you are cooking. So it will still be there. So now you're realizing that I can see this is the meat portion. So this is probably fine. This is a little bit, if you are still like, you know, want to see it, you can probably like, you know, get. The reason I don't want to make like, you know, too many of the like caves in the meat is because then they don't get, either they get too much of the rub, and they like, you know, doesn't cook very well, or so you want to keep it smooth, aerodynamically smooth as well, so when you're cooking it, basically doesn't get too uneven of a smoke. Here. So after that, if I start cutting it, I'm probably gonna like, you know, be too much. So as I said, if you have time, and you know that's the only brisket you're gonna do, and you have a lot of time, you can remove some of this thing as well. This is also protective. I don't like this thing. I think this is more probably just what is it called, more aesthetic than anything else, because I think this fat renders. I've never seen, like, you know, if anything, your brisket, when you cook it, this is the part that will be mostly be burned if you have over like, you know, cooked. So leaving some of this is maybe fine. I just remove it because I think it probably, like, you know, affects the taste a little bit, but you know. So this one is a little bit thicker, so I'll remove this one so it doesn't come into when you're eating it. It's not biting through and making it difficult. So in addition to this, you have to have, like, you know, to make this, you have to have a supportive wife who allows you to go and spend money on these boning knives. This one is getting a little dull. So I have another one and another one as well, in case this one. Because, you know, in the beginning, like, when you're just maybe cooking it maybe once in a month or sometime that less, and getting all of these things, you need to have a wife who doesn't say anything to you, encourages you to keep on doing it. Why? She's laughing. Maybe she's not encouraging, she's just she doesn't want to get into a useless argument. Okay, so these are, like I said, these are the big pieces of fat that I'm just moving. So here, I am not happy with this, but I am actually very late. Yeah, if I would, this is a good fatty, like, brisket, which is good, but I like this to be even, like, this has too much of this thing usually.
So why aren't you doing it even?
Why?
It's
because
getting
I've gotten
warm?
too late. No, it's well, yeah. One thing is, like, I wanted to do it day before yesterday, but I'm lazy, so I thawed it, and then my wife is very supportive. So I asked her, supportive in a sense, she looks at my face and she gives me the opinion that I want to hear. So I asked her, should I do it tonight or tomorrow morning? Then she realized I'm so tired, so she said, okay, I'll do it tomorrow morning. And then in the morning I woke up and I started doing something else. I said, should I do it today or should I do it in the evening? She said, do it in the evening. And then so basically, though I was telling Tahir, my brother, to make sure that when you thaw, if you have frozen it, you thaw it, and then, like, when it's thawed, that you time it well, because you want to do it, like, you want to have at least 12 hours before you expect it to be served. So I usually like, do it now at night, because I put it up at night the first 3 or 4 hours, and then I don't like to do it right at the time when I want it to be served. So I would probably do it 1 or 2 a.m. in the morning, wake up for the fajr, and, like, wrap it, and then have the brisket ready by 2 p.m. or so, and have people come in. So it's sitting up for a couple of hours, and have people come in, like, around 6, 7, 8 p.m. But this one now, the time is like almost 12 noon, because I decided I should go probably and walk and exercise. That will probably make me feel better. But, that puts me at least at a little time. So, if I'm really, like, when I used to be, Creekstone is very expensive, so I don't want to waste it, but I'm going to just to tell you that it doesn't make a difference if it looks brown like this, but I'm going to just cut it to show you that, like, it's a very, very good piece of meat, Mashallah, you should say it. Yeah, my mother used to, like, always cover the meat with something like a white. She said, meat ko nazar lag jati hai. So I guess hopefully you won't get the nazar. So this part, like, if you look it up, this is again like a big fatty chunk. So I want to remove part of it. So eventually, when the brisket gets cooked, these portions are what's going to make what we call the burnt end. This, like, call eventually when it's cooked, inshallah, like, if I remember to make the video at that time, I'll show it to you, because I sometimes lose interest. And if I lost interest, then you're gonna probably just have this video. Okay. So I'm just basically looking visually to make sure there's not, like, too much of the big, like this thing. I'll just remove this thing. So this part on the flat, there's not much fat. So whenever you're even removing it as well, you want to make sure that you're not being overzealous and you haven't, like, removed too much of the fat, like, So this is when, like, it gets cooked. This is going to basically just, like, kind of protect it while it's getting cooked, and it's going to get just, like, kind of melted in. So this part is really thin. One more thing that I've learned to do is that it's very important to know which way is the grain of the meat. So when you're cutting the brisket, you want to basically cut it opposite to it. So depending on whether it's a left side or right side, the grain of meat will be different. So if you look it up, this is running this way. So when I will cut the brisket, because you won't be able to see it at that time, you want to cut it, let me just flip it. It's actually very heavy and I've weighted, so it's not as. So this is running this way, the grain. So when I'm gonna cut it, brisket, I'm gonna cut it from this side, so it basically will cut. So one of the things that you can do is sometimes, because once it gets cooked, you would not know, so you can in fact cut a piece. Usually I would do it if it is on the thinner edge, that I will cut that piece, so I will remember that I'm gonna cut the other way. But in this way, it looks like that we're gonna just basically cut it opposite to this when we're gonna cut the brisket for the flat itself. I'm not gonna cut it because this is the thicker part to make okay, I'll just, so if this meat was running, grains were running this way, I will cut a piece here to make sure that I remember to cut from there. The reason I'm not cutting a big meat from here is because this is the thicker part. This is the part that is going to be the good part itself. So I don't want to cut it, but hopefully this will remind us that we're gonna cut this.
Do you have to cut a piece, or can you make a slash?
No, slash wouldn't stay.
Not
no,
a deep
because this is going to
slash.
shrink as well. This is going to shrink. So this is not how it's going to look like. This is going to look like about this big of a brisket. So if at that time, you know it, especially it doesn't really matter, if you're going to just serve among yourself. I've seen people, which bothers me the most is when they start cutting brisket, my brisket themselves, and then kind of ruin it. But, if it is for a competition or so, or something that you really want it to be cut well, then this is the way it needs to be cut. So you can put a mark in. So in our case, we're going to put the mark in that we're going to cut it opposite to this cut here, the thinner part. This thing, I'll just remove this. So some people will, usually when I get the brisket from Creekstone, it doesn't have this part.
Which part?
This part. So in Texas, if they cook it, they will just cut this part as well, because this is going to get burned. Okay. So in Kansas, they will make the burnt end from this portion as well. I don't like to waste meat. If it was a competition, I'll probably cut this portion, this thinner part, before I cook it. But because I'm cooking it from at home, I don't want to waste any part of the meat. But if it was a competition, I don't want too much of the burnt areas. I want it to be the best portion. The reason is that, and the reason to cut it is because when you cook the brisket, so you will wonder so you can cut it afterwards. The only thing is that the edges are not then cooked, or edges are not burned, didn't get the smoke. So if I cut it, then this area underneath is going to get smoked, and that will be my done brisket. In this way, when I'll cut this thing, it may not be edible at that time, and this area wouldn't be smoked on the top, but that's the only difference. But I'll cook it in case this is saved, then I can eat it as well. So you want to make sure that so this is, remember that the fat that we removed from here, this is the place where the fat comes out into. So if you in fact cut this, you'll see that this is the other end of that fat. I'm just removing it just to show it to you. Otherwise, aerodynamically, this looks fine. And this place does not have that much of the fat itself. This brisket was, as I said, was not sitting up in the room temperature, but in the fridge. So it's not as cold. So it's a little difficult to cut that fat. Otherwise, if you do it well, it's really almost really cold, you will find that it's a lot easier to cut that fat. Watch your hand when you're doing it to make sure you're not cutting yourself. I've done that you still have to cook, but it just takes the joy out of cooking. So again, like, you know, this is the this fat portion is the one that is running across between this top muscle and the bottom muscle itself. And again, like, you know, make sure that there's no pockets of solid fat. How much time is it? I won't make too big of a video.
20 minutes.
20 minutes of just trimming? Yes. It takes me about an hour to prepare the brisket, which basically is, but that's usually the difficult part. Once it gets, like, you know, cooking, then you don't have to worry about it. So now I'm gonna just, like, you know, I'm fine with it. I'm gonna season it. I'm gonna just take a break. Marie, can you?
Pause.
And the other thing is, I'm gonna make sure that your surfaces are clean, because once you're gonna turn it around, like, you know, move around, you wanna make sure that after this. Pause it.
Okay, see you after the break.
Okay.